Coming up today, South Korea's main opposition party says it will end its record-breaking filibuster aimed at blocking a government-backed anti-terrorism bill. President Park Geun-hye vows to pile more pressure on North Korea unless the regime abandons its nuclear weapons program and ends its provocations. She also calls on lawmakers to swiftly pass bills aimed at revitalizing the economy. Plus, South Korea's exports continue to head south. Outbound shipments plunge for the 14th straight month in February. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Tuesday, the 1st of March. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us on Korea's Independence Movement Day. I'm Mark Broom. And we start off with this morning's ceremony marking Korea's 97th Independence Movement Day. In her commemorative speech, President Park Geun-hye invited North Korea back for talks after several weeks of not mentioning dialogue following the regime's continued nuclear and missile provocations. That is under the condition that North Korea abandons its nuclear weapons program. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun is on the line for more. So Ji-sun, there were some notable remarks in the president's speech.
That's right, Mark. She brought back her vision for unification after an extended stern stance against Pyongyang following its fourth nuclear test and a long-range missile launch last month, saying that she wants people in the North to also live in a peacefully unified Korea so that they too can be granted freedom, equal human rights, and prosperity. President Park said unifying the two Koreas is the way to continue the legacy hardly earned by our ancestors who fought for independence 97 years ago. For the past couple of months, President Park has mainly stressed South Korea's national security as North Korea breached her trust-building process with its continued provocations. But on this Independence Movement Day, she left the door open for dialogue, saying it's up to Pyongyang now and that it cannot maintain its regime with nukes.
앞으로 우리 정부는 대화의 문을 닫지는 않을 것이지만 북한이 비핵화 의지를 보이지 않고 변화를 거부하는 한 우리와 국제사회의 압박은 계속될 것입니다. 정부는 앞으로 더욱 확고한 안보 태세와 국제 공조를 바탕으로 북한이 반드시 핵을 포기할 수밖에 없도록 만들어 갈 것입니다. 이제 선택은 북한의 몫입니다.
And also citing Seoul and Tokyo's settlement of Japan's wartime sexual slavery issue, agreed at the end of last year, President Park said Tokyo must sincerely carry out its pledges to open a new chapter of bilateral relations, and that Japan must acknowledge history and its past wrongdoings. She wrapped up by reiterating her initiatives for improving Korea's economic fundamentals, saying she will go on with major reform drives despite the political difficulties. Among them, President Park stressed labor reform was the most important and urgent way to create more jobs for Korea's young people. I'm Song Ji-sun reporting live from Presidential Office of Cheongwade.
Now, UN Secretary-General Ban KiMoon has urged South Korea and Japan to comply with their landmark wartime sex slavery agreement. Speaking at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on Monday, Secretary Ban stressed the importance of addressing the pain of the now elderly victims no matter how many years have passed. Historians estimate some 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military before and during World War II. Now, in regards to North Korea, the UN chief said the UN Commission of Inquiry has recorded as many human rights violations as it could and would strive even harder to rectify the problem. Now, to mark the March 1st movement, we're going to take a look at where South Korea-Japan relations are today, whether the pain from Japan's colonial rule and wartime atrocities remains, or whether things are moving in a more positive direction. Gon-swa with the details.
They enjoy each other's culture, like to travel to each other's countries, and are major trade partners. On the other side, historic and territorial disputes have been straining their relations for decades. The Korea-Japan relationship is still struggling today, decades after Japan's colonial rule over South Korea and beyond Korea's liberation from the neighboring country. That includes Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women before and during World War II, as well as its attitude toward those crimes. On that front, hope for a breakthrough sprouted on December 28th last year.
It's been 2 months now since South Korea and Japan's landmark agreement on the so-called comfort women issue. But then why are demonstrations here in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul on that matter still being held every Wednesday?
For one, many Korean citizens and victims, of which only 44 are alive today, do not accept the deal, saying it lacks sincerity.
There needs to be an apology based on precise historical consciousness from Japan, not one of mere diplomatic expression. I feel there is a lot of ambiguity.
However, the government said numerous times a renegotiation is not possible, but that it'll do its best with the remaining tasks, such as ensuring the transfer of the promised compensation of roughly $8.9 million from Japan through a South Korean foundation.
The establishment of the foundation is an important part to the implementation of the deal. Working level talks with the Ministry of Gender, Equality and Family are in process.
But experts say that despite the achievements between the two governments, there is more work to be done.
We all know that we have attempted many things to normalize our relationship with Japan, but it has been pretty much limited on the government level. But the people-to-people level is not really good yet.
Along with the step-by-step improvements in the political and diplomatic arena, we should expand our bilateral project to boost economic cooperation. And during that process, anti-Korea and anti-Japan sentiment could be reduced.
That may take some time, though, as Japan's sincerity about improving relations with Korea is being questioned. Even after the December 28th deal, Japan submitted a denial to the UN, saying there was no evidence that its military forcibly detained women, and continues to lay claim to Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's main opposition party says it is ending its more than 1 week-long filibuster aimed at blocking the passage of a controversial counter-terrorism bill, but then delayed its announcement on the subject this morning, and that has raised questions about whether the filibuster, which has delayed voting on both the counter-terrorism bill and a new electoral map, will actually end. For more, we connect live with our Shin Se-min on the line from the National Assembly. Se-min, what's the latest?
Yes, Mark, the party's floor leader, Lee Jong-gol, was supposed to make the announcement at a press conference at 9 a.m. this morning. But that plan, as you said, got postponed just minutes before it was scheduled to start. In a text message to reporters, Lee said the party was going to hold an emergency general meeting of its lawmakers, and the press conference would start after that. But at this point, we don't know for sure when that will be. But there are some speculations that the meeting will be held at around 9 p.m. this evening, but nothing is certain at this point. Now, ruling party floor leader Won Yu-chol was scheduled to give a briefing at around 9:30 a.m. after the opposition party press conference, but that's been canceled due to the postponed conference.
So, Se-min, I guess the question really is then, does this mean that the filibuster is still ongoing at the National Assembly?
Yes, Mark, as we speak, lawmaker Im Soo-kyung of Minju Party is at the Assembly delivering her speech, becoming the 30th speaker since the filibuster began last Tuesday. But the marathon filibuster will eventually come to an end sometime today. The ruling Sanctuary Party wants to package the vote on the counterterrorism bill and the new electoral map by holding plenary session as early as this afternoon or on Wednesday. However, the Minju Party is opposed to the idea Korea, saying that they would rather hold a session on Wednesday. But such remarks came even before the opposition party postponed its press conference this morning, so that will probably change as the day goes on. Now, as you remember, the opposition is filibustering the counterterrorism bill because it believes it will grant greater power to the nation's spy agency to track potential terror suspects. And the electoral map issue is also becoming more urgent by the day, as Koreans will be headed to the polls in mid-April for a general election. Well, that's all I have for now. This is Shin Se-min reporting from the National Assembly.
Now, South Korea's foreign minister is expected to address North Korea's human rights issues during an upcoming 4-day trip to Geneva. Seoul's foreign ministry says Yoon Byung-se will travel to Switzerland on this Tuesday to attend the 31st session of the UN Human Rights Council and the Conference on Disarmament as a speaker at both of those meetings. Minister Yoon is expected to bring up human rights violations in North Korea to draw international attention to the issue. His North Korean counterpart, Lee Soo-young, is also scheduled to give a speech at the human rights meeting, most likely to deny accusations against Pyongyang. 2016 marks the 10th year of the UN Human Rights Council, with South Korea holding the presidency this year. The US has dismissed suggestions there's a connection between its negotiations with Seoul on the deployment of the THAAD missile defense system to South Korea and its efforts to win China's support for stronger sanctions on North Korea. US State Department spokesman John Kirby said Monday that there is absolutely no connection between the two consultations. He also said that no decisions have been made on THAAD. The US and South Korea have been preparing to launch a working group on THAAD when they announced a delay. Now, this delay came at the same time the US was in talks with China on the UN sanctions for North Korea, and that raised this speculation the US was backing down on the issue in the face of Beijing's intense opposition to THAAD. Now, worrying economic news because South Korea's exports have now been on their longest downward slide ever. And with the continuation of the global economic slowdown, experts aren't so optimistic there'll be a turnaround anytime soon. Kim Min-ji has the details.
It's another slump. According to the Trade Ministry, Korea's exports fell over 12% in January compared to the same month last year to $36.4 billion. That marks the 14th straight month of decline and the longest downward streak ever, replacing the previous record of 13 months from March 2001. The ministry attributed the fall to low global oil prices and slow global economic growth, especially in China. Exports of oil-related products drove the decline, while falling export prices also pulled the figure down. But thanks to an uptick in shipments of mobile devices and computers, February's figure marks an improvement from the previous month. In January, outbound shipments fell over 18%, which was the biggest yearly drop in more than 6 years. Imports, on the other hand, slid almost 15% on year to $29 billion in February, due mainly to a slump in shipments of raw materials and capital goods. As a result, last month's trade surplus amounted to $7.4 billion, extending the surplus streak for a 49th straight month. However, what's worrisome is that the surpluses have mainly been driven by a sharp decrease in imports, rather than an increase in exports.
The global economy is facing difficulty, and as these conditions linger, it's hard to say Korea's exports will make a major improvement.
The government is vowed to do all it can to boost the country's outbound shipments, but experts predict the downward trend will continue throughout the first half of the year. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's per capita GDP last year is estimated to have decreased for the first time since the global financial crisis. According to figures released by the Seoul-based Hyundai Research Institute on this Tuesday, Korea's per capita GDP in 2015 stood at slightly over $27,200. That's a 2.6% drop from the previous year. It's also the first decline since 2009, when Korea recorded a more than 10% on-year decrease. While countries like the US, China and India posted an increase, Japan saw an on-year dip, plunge in fact, dropping over 10%. Now, citing figures from the International Monetary Fund, the institute said over 70% of 186 countries posted an on-year decrease in their per capita GDP due to the sluggish global economy and the strong US dollar. Now, the race for the White House heats up this week. On Tuesday, Americans across more than a dozen states and territories will head to the polls on the biggest single day of voting during the election process so far. Once the votes are counted, the early front-runners, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, could end up taking resounding leads in their respective races. Kim Mo-gyun reports.
On March 1st, voters in 12 states and 1 U.S. territory head to the polls for the Super Tuesday contests. Super Tuesday is when the largest number of primaries and caucuses take place on a single day. Ahead of the big event, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton visited Massachusetts and Virginia to campaign. She sent her husband Bill Clinton to make the closing pitch to Texans and her daughter Chelsea to Minnesota on her behalf. After crushing her main Democratic rival Bernie Sanders in the South Carolina Democratic primary, she is now in a strong position to win the Democratic nomination. Sanders is focusing on white liberals and millennials in Vermont and Minnesota, hoping for a reverse on Tuesday. On the Republican side, frontrunner Donald Trump continued his verbal attacks on his rivals Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio as he campaigned around Virginia and Georgia. Cruz will stay in his home state of Texas, and Rubio is putting extra focus on Minnesota. Despite the best efforts of Cruz, Rubio, and Sanders, most pundits expect Clinton and Trump to go head-to-head for the White House in the fall. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for now. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in. And to all our Korean viewers around the world, we would like to wish you a happy Independence Movement Day. Until our next newscast, goodbye.